Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm Cameron Hendricks. I'm one of the co-founders at Magellan AI. We are an audio-first intelligence and attribution platform. At Magellan AI, we've certainly seen programmatic podcast advertising increase, so it's certainly a hot topic for today. And joining me are three leaders in the audio space. So I've got Lindsay Freed, SVP Media Investment at Basis Technology, Mattia Verzella, VP Programmatic Partnerships at Triton Digital, and Bob Hunt, Senior Director Audio at Hearts and Science. Thanks again for joining me. Before we kick things off, please share what's your favorite podcast right now. Bob, let's start with you.
There's a new one that I've been enjoying. It's called Power Lines. Oliver Darcy is the host. He was with CNN before. It's all about media. Also, it's got a fun Succession-like intro music. I think the sonic branding is always good, right? So I'm always trying to learn more about the space. Also, definitely represents very much more of an independent media, right? So he was in a bigger place, representing media, independent, and using podcasting to do it. So,
Mattia?
I'm a econ nerd, and because this is a podcast about programmatic advertising, it's about revenue, and it's about economics, and it's about money. I listen to a podcast called One and Twos. A couple of professors from Columbia, they are analyzing the macroeconomics inside the United States and outside and abroad. Very interesting podcast, especially these times.
And am I on?
I think so.
Everyone can hear me? I am a movie watching and movie quoting nerd, and so I really enjoy the podcast The Rewatchables, where Bill Simmons and a few others like to watch or rewatch movies from the past and really break them down into bits and pieces and analyze parts of the movie and just have a good time laughing at it and really make you realize things that went over your head way back when.
So one of my favorite podcasts right now, A-Lab, talking about legal hijinks. I'm slightly ashamed because it does not monetize, as far as I know, so it's not appropriate for this panel. So here at Podcast Movement, let's face it, sometimes programmatic is considered a four-letter word. But nonetheless, we have at Magellan AI observed that about 1 in 4 advertisers includes programmatic as part of the media mix they're going to market with in audio. However, it's also notable that we haven't seen programmatic growth come at the expense of host-read ads in terms of growth in the market. So, Bob, as the ad buyer on stage here, from that perspective, when you think about programmatic in audio, what does that mean? And how do you recommend brands you're working with leverage programmatic in audio?
Yeah, totally. So when we first talk to either current clients or new clients about the space, we really look at it in two ways, right? You obviously have your more influencer side of things, and then obviously the audience side of things. And our main recommendation is partners should be taking advantage of both, right? Now, obviously that ratio between influencer and audience might be different based on the various needs. Obviously, are you a regional brand? Are you national? What are your various goals? Do you have certain legal restrictions? What are you trying to get out of this, right? I mean, the number one thing we always try to look at is our view is audio is becoming a digital channel on the lines of search, social, and video, and what can we do to justify and grow the percentage of spend that is audio, right? So the ratio that's going to help us do that is what we're going to recommend. Obviously, there's a lot of talk in these type of halls, right? We're like, oh, I don't really like programmatic for X, Y, Z reasons. It is not again, to your point, it's not a replacement, right? Now, there are also a lot of brands who might be buying only programmatic. We get that asked too, right? Hey, can I just do a PMP and call it a day? And there are a lot of fun, exciting ways to do that. But ideally, you would do a mix of both. So it's definitely a tool where you're probably not buying, most brands are not buying 10,000 shows from a direct host read standpoint, right? So it's an opportunity to supplement what you're doing and manage frequency across a variety of different shows.
Mattia, I know you spend a big part of your time working with demand partners. Same question for you.
So let me take a step back because you mentioned about the number of agencies and buyers looking into programmatic. There was a stat that was going around that 30% of our time, of our digital entertainment time is spent on audio. But then if you look at the budgets, it's just 3%. is dedicated to audio. And if you give the breakdown between direct sales and programmatic, you have 80, 90% on direct sales, 10, 15%, depending who you're asking, on the programmatic side. This to me is a great opportunity for brands during times like this where budgets might be cut, might be reduced, to not be forgotten. Because programmatic helps you do what a direct sales, a host thread doesn't really do, which is scale, targeting capabilities, very efficient way of buying. And so when brands don't want to be forgotten during these times, also publisher needs to be kind of like mindful that they need to probably insert programmatic in their way of like selling their shows, because you have efficiency in CPMs, you have budgets that are a little limited, and then you really want to have that revenue coming in constantly.
Awesome. Lindsay, I know Basis has put a focus and concentration on podcast growth. Would love to kind of hear how that's performed for you in the first half of the year and how you see it kind of evolving.
Yeah. They touched on some really important aspects, I think, of programmatic and using a DSP in general, besides the scale and reach. Obviously, we're trying to reach people in the moment. So podcast is really about moments-based targeting. With the DSP and the focus on growing podcast inventory, we've also opened up the avenues of private marketplace deals. So being able to have those one-to-one deals between a brand and a publisher with podcast inventory, it enables that brand to use their first-party data in partnership with that inventory or that publisher. So really just expanding from the scalability of open market, but also the customizable nature of programmatic PMP deals.
Very cool. And Mattia, what can you share about some of the barriers or challenges that folks face with programmatic activations?
Yeah, I think the first one is really about getting trained, right? In any new space or even old spaces, everyone has to read the manual, number one. And I think that we kind of forget about it, and we get into doing something without kind of like stepping back and say, what are my goals? Who do I need to talk to, right? So on stage, you have four different types of like players in the same field. Invest sometimes in reaching out to, attribution partners, agencies, brands, SSP, DSPs. Really get the lay of the land. Understand what you want to do, your goals, and that comes out of education and training. And I think that is the most important part of like getting programmatic to a place that is more than just 10, 15% of the advertising budget in podcasting.
Yeah, and kind of speaking of partners and finding partners, so reaching out to them, like we have shout out for the Podscape, so you can download the Podscape from Sounds Profitable, and Magellan AI has a list of all the companies that we see active in the podcast ecosystem. Kind of place to find where some of those companies may be.
And this is such a place where everyone is happy to work with everyone else. Like, there's a bunch of competitors, but at the same time, if everyone knows what they're talking about, it's actually even more fun to do it, right? Instead of having like an industry that is broken because half of the industry doesn't know what they're talking about, the other half is pissed at them. So just use these events like this one to get better at, knowing more about programmatic advertising and how to create revenues.
Bob, what about challenges and barriers that you see?
Well, I think the thing we run into is that obviously this space is not nearly as built out and as mature as the other spaces, right? So the joke I make sometimes, sometimes you're talking about programmatic, display or programmatic video. It's like, oh, this is truly like it's just like a car that's been tested and there's standards and stuff of this sort. Versus like sometimes we're dealing with like experimental planes. It's like we're truly building the plane as we go along, right? So things like managing inclusion lists, making sure we're on the certain shows. Talk about things, obviously it's growing in terms of brand suitability, right? Things like measurement. A lot of times because audio is truly a separate ad tech ecosystem, you do need to work with the core audio ad tech players in the space in order to make that work. right? And so, and a lot of programmatic buyers, they're just like, hey, can I just turn on a PMP and expect it to all be the same? And there are a lot of actually, like in some ways, podcasting audio is more like social than it is display and video, right? Obviously, leaving video podcasts aside for a second, right? It's truly, hey, like people are using them in certain apps. It's a mobile experience. And so making sure that you understand that it is separate, and there are a lot of programmatic teams out there who don't fully understand that or want to take the time to do it. And they're like, well, why didn't this work? We get this all the time. Well, this isn't working. This isn't delivering. Well, they're like, 4 other things you should be doing, right? Now, obviously, there are a lot of people, like everyone on this panel, right, who are more than willing to help you, right? And it's still very much a rising tide lifts all boats, industry, which I really appreciate. But those are really the biggest things.
Just to add on that too, I think they bring up a good point that it's really important to ensure that you know which partner excels at which step of the process. So a DSP can really deliver, but a measurement partner can really prove the value of what you're investing in. So I think that's just really something to hit home, and that, podcast does work in a different way. We've got downloads, we've got dynamic ad insertion. So while technology can do that for you, there's also a component of the measurement that's really important to show the offline and online conversions and things that really prove the value of running within a podcast.
And just to add on to that, I think there are a lot of people in the podcast space who view programmatic as like any inserted ad that's bought from an audience whatsoever, right? Adding a DSP who really understands what they're talking about into the space is really critical because you can manage that frequency. Most people here are very familiar with like high frequency downloads, right? That one household in Idaho that downloaded the podcast 10,000 times or whatever, right? And so, but managing that in the world where we don't have an IES or double verify for podcasting in the same way. So adding a DSP as that layer is really critical, right? And the other thing, obviously, we always stress like if your agency partner, buying partner is not talking about pixel-based measurement in some form, obviously a lot of great partners out there, they're not doing their job. And so we really, again, making sure you have an audio sort of podcasting centric partner that can help you, measure in real time is really critical.
Yeah, let's actually shift gears and talk a little bit more about performance. Podcasts are certainly measurable, and in Magellan AI's benchmarks, we see programmatic ads perform at let's say like a slightly lower response rate than what we see typically from host-read ads. But the cost differential is something that you have to take into account. And so what ends up happening is that oftentimes like the return on advertising spend can exceed the amount for programmatic compared to host-read spots. So kind of curious, like Bob, do you typically how do you advise clients really to get into programmatic? Would love to hear more about like how you consider them. Is it a test? Is it like, do you have folks going all in to programmatic?
It truly, and this is maybe not the best answer, but it truly depends on the client, right? There's some clients who are very programmatic centric. It's just easier for them to do programmatic versus like picking certain shows. They get an analysis paralysis and it takes way longer. I think a lot of times for a lot of bigger brands, it's easier for them to think of things in a platform centric way because that's how they buy the majority of their other media, right? So there are some clients we start with just, it's almost all programmatic. And there's some clients we do no programmatic. It truly depends on the comfortability. Also, understanding where audio and podcasting fit within the greater media ecosystem that a client has, right? Another thing, obviously, it's mainly podcasting. There's a huge opportunity in streaming as well. Latest I've heard is only about 30% of the streaming audio marketplace is bought programmatically. There's an opportunity for that to go to 80%, right? Even though there's still going to be a significant host-read business in podcasting, we definitely do not want that to go away, or is that going to go away anytime soon, right? If anything, in the space becoming more bifurcated, it's going to grow even further. But there's a huge opportunity to grow programmatic audio across both streaming and podcasting.
Mattia, I want to come to you and in a similar vein related to like performance, and how do you typically advise podcasters to think about like the mix between programmatic ad slots in their podcast versus other ad slots that like host-read spots?
So we're in a very, very special spot because we are an SSP, right? So we are a supply-side platform. We basically work mainly, I would say, with publishers and podcast show hosts. What we always recommend is that it really depends on the type of content. The content is really driving. The audience is really driving, depending on what kind of audience you have gathered around your content. It's a very good question, but doesn't have a really good answer because it really depends on what do you want to achieve, right? And what the brands want to achieve and what the publisher wants to achieve. Is revenue important? Is, solidifying the audience around the topic, and then you find the sponsors and the brands around that topic? It really depends.
And Lindsay, how are you and Basis converting clients' interest into podcasting? Is that something that you're seeing kind of come organically from their side, or are you often bringing podcasts to clients?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a mix of both. I think organically we've seen an increase in requests from clients. Oftentimes it's very specific podcasts, which we can work with our publisher partners to generate custom deals for. But then I think it's also expanding outside of just what an advertiser would typically do in streaming. It's reaching additional inventory through our podcast inventory and being able to expand, basically scale in that dimension.
Awesome. And so, Mattia, what would you recommend that folks do to, increase ad spend in podcasting, and as you think about like the mix of like programmatic versus, host-read?
In terms of publishers?
Yeah.
Well, there are a few things, right? One is also technical. It's very technical. Having, from a publisher point of view, and this is probably a little farther away from like the creator conversation, but publisher and podcasters, specifically publisher with audience and with shows and with different type of technical infrastructure, they really have to look at their ads TXT. This is something that we're not talking enough about it, but having all the signals from the ads TXT is basically a page that tells the type of business that the publisher has with demand partners, right? And so if that information, if that text, if that piece of data isn't correct, you're not gonna expand. You're not gonna increase your revenue, because the information that the DSP is looking for is not found in the file, and so there's no spending. So from a publisher point of view, really take care of the signals, ads TXT, your metadata on your podcast, on your publisher, on your station, or anything needs to be pristine. Not only because it's good to have good data, but because the DSP is looking at that data. And right now, AI is also looking at that data. And so if you don't have clear, clean data, the AI will output something that is garbage. And so really for the publisher, you want to make money, make sure all your signals are correct, and start from there in building your business.
And where do folks go? So like ads TXT is a great example, like kind of a technical topic. Where do folks go to find out like how they should be configuring that? Like, what resources would you recommend?
Usually the SSP should be the main source of how that ads TXT is done. There's a lot of information online, but I would definitely rely on this SSP to actually, make the right call and guide them. Yeah.
But having better standards for things like, again, like overall content signals, ad load and ad position, right? So not just making sure that, hey, I fire up a podcast and there are 5 pre-roll ads before that. Okay, that's just going to get fast forwarded, right? Or even like, I think it also bothers me is like if there's a podcast and maybe they may not do as many host-read ads, but they like, there's literally a programmatic ad insert in the middle of a word, it's like jarring, and making sure there's a quality experience. Because we also realize, like, I think everyone in the space, they got into it because they love it, right? And so making sure we're creating a quality experience for the listener is still really important. And I think there's this viewpoint that, hey, most programmatic is just to like destroy that experience, and that's definitely not the case. I think one thing that's also really special about podcasting is the amount of listeners you need to have a podcast that's successful that you could turn into a job is exponentially less than it is like a YouTube channel, right? Like if you look at YouTube, if you don't have over 1 million subscribers, like nobody is paying attention to you, like really, right? Versus in pods, like, you would know, like if you have 25 to 50,000 downloads an episode, like you could really turn that into a business across a variety of different, I was like Charles over there, like, a variety of different, revenue streams, right? And so that is something that is important to us, right? That it's not just, hey, this isn't VidCon, right? Like, and again, like, hey, you should try to monetize your content in any way that you can. Like, we're all trying to grow the pie, but it is something that we do think about, right? I think we're not fully there yet. We've made a lot of strides, but we are trying to work on better universal standards that are just that things are commonplace. Understanding the uniqueness of podcasting.
Do you think thinking about, you mentioned video. Is the choice between video and programmatic, one that's like, a podcaster has to pick one path, or what do you see folks doing?
I mean, obviously because of YouTube, right, and YouTube being bought in a completely different way, that truly is like a different channel and buying stream, right? So I think everything we've been talking about is more on the audio and RSS from a podcasting programmatic lens, right? That doesn't mean you should. Obviously, this is not the panel about like should you put your show on YouTube and the challenges and strengths of that, right?
And the cost.
And the cost, right? There's definitely more cost there. We have been, slowly exploring the idea of could we recreate what we do in audio with like say a YouTube, right, from a podcast standpoint. As you guys know, there's very much a Berlin Wall between what we have from a measurement standpoint and all things audio versus all things video. So it's very hard to justify, hey, I'm going to move 20% of our audio into, say, programmatic video versus if you're buying, hey, say a direct host read and it's across, YouTube and RSS. You have to obviously transact against that, but it's easier to buy in one way. And so the other thing we run into is when you get into the YouTube ecosystem, it's buying YouTube just across the board, right? And so how does a podcast from a programmatic buying standpoint differ from just like Mr. Beast videos or whatever, right? Or various things you could buy through like a channel factory for just to name an example, right? I think that's something that we still haven't figured, right? I think, as you know, though, the vast majority of the time spent listening is still very much in audio. And a lot of the revenue driven is very much still in audio. Now, again, across not just audio, video, events, subscriptions, you're trying to build your business, you should look into all these things, right? I would never tell somebody not to do something. But I think also this vision that we're all just gonna put videos up on YouTube, is I think kind of missing the forest of the trees.
Makes sense.
Probably, I would say too, like subscriber data helps you kind of tie those channels together. So from a programmatic, whether it's on YouTube, through Google, or whether it's through, a DSP in the open market, if you really focus too on subscriber data and being able to tie those together, I think, it makes it a little bit easier to find the correct audience. But to Bob's point, the budgets are very siloed between video and audio, and so it's really trying to find that commonality between the two.
Yeah, another thing you bring up is like in audio, when you are actively going on Apple, Spotify, various independent apps, you are actively choosing to subscribe, actively choosing to download that show, right? In YouTube, the majority of the consumption on pods on YouTube is people who are just, it was on the homepage. Like I was watching some highlights of again, this is the podcast talking about the game or things it's your algorithm, right? And the same thing with social. It's a much more of an algorithmic experience. So it is a different audience. So, I mean, obviously you're going to be most marketers have a relationship with Google, right? You're going to buy something like that. And so, and that's definitely a growing inventory source for that, right? But it is a different audience. And so you should just think of that in that context.
Super helpful. And Lindsay, what do you recommend advertisers do to capitalize on podcast momentum as we head into the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about it as part of your omni-channel, your full funnel approach. I think I mentioned earlier, it's very much about moments. And if you think about us now that we're back out in the world 5 years after 2020, everyone's commuting, everyone's got their time where they spend listening to things, but they've also got their time when they're browsing or scrolling, and they've also got their time when they're at home and streaming. And so I think it's really important to think about reaching your audience in that moment during the day and using day parting and the correct channels and advertising formats to do so.
Awesome. Mattia, any parting thoughts?
Give programmatic a chance. No. No, I really like the idea of like really thinking about omni-channel as omni-channel, like all channels. Like we need to think about, the brands and the agencies need to really think about the journey of your brand and your message to the audience that goes throughout the day on TV, on podcasts, on display, on social media. So really adding all the different channels now that we are, 5 years away from COVID. Now that the life is back on track, we can really figure out how to address those audiences. Yeah.
I guess last thing to say, like one thing I really love about podcasting, it's very real, right? These obviously are like real conversations with real people, and I think that also applies to getting into podcasting or programmatic podcasting, right? It's like, why are you doing this? What are you trying to get out of this? And what is the measurement framework you have to determine success, right? It's not just, test programmatic. It's like, well, why are you doing podcasting? Why are you doing audio? If you think about it in those ways, a lot of times programmatic can help you supplement what you're doing or be a way in, right? And so, but making sure you have that why audio and podcasting, or, what are your goals of media in general? Why audio and podcasting? And then within that, what are your goals to measure success? If you don't have those things, you probably aren't going to be successful.
That's so important.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. So I think we have time for questions. If there are maybe one question, if anyone has a question in the audience here. Everyone's already sold on programmatic, so.
They're all bought in. Yeah.
One question right here.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Come up,
Yeah.
I'll repeat your question.
This is for Lindsay. What do you mean by kind of moments-based, like taking advantage of those moments-based podcasts moments? What does that mean?
When I think of moments-based, I think of intentionality. So a user is downloading or streaming a podcast, and they have a different mindset. So if you think about, audio when you're strolling the grocery store, you're not really paying attention to what is going on. You're really focused. With podcasts and with audio, the consumer is purposefully listening and focused on the content, and so your messaging as a brand is more consumed, or it's more purposeful in that moment. So when I think of moments, I think of that intentionality, like moments-based TV watching, the Super Bowl, the Oscars, things like that. There's more intentional consuming in that moment, and that's what I think about with podcasts.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the panelists here, Bob, Mattia, and Lindsay.